So recently, I was trying to rig a character, move around a character, and it was really my first attempt to do so. And in a lot of ways, I got eventually the results I wanted, but it was a little more manual than I was expecting. So computers don't really, computers generally aren't people. People understand computers don't think the way that humans generally do, but they perform operations, mathematical or procedural operations on data, right? So at this time, if you are, you want to animate a character, generally your computer isn't able to figure out what it is exactly, how it's supposed to move. So you need to make a way for your unfeeling computer to somehow respond to what you have. So this last week was kind of a learning experience. What I was expecting to happen was I could just somehow use automatic weight procedure, and this thing would automatically animate. And I realized it really didn't work that way at all. It was very ineffective. And what you want to do is you want to have basically a closed shape. That's a simple shape that doesn't have more than one thing intersecting, more than one object intersecting that. But for example, this object here, say I copy this object, I translate it horizontally. That would be the simple object, right? And at this point, what you can do is you can describe movement weights. Now, okay, so what we have here is an armature. An armature, in my understanding, is basically a set of physically related points that have centers of rotation. That's really all they are. So, I was experimenting with the weights and how they work, really. And what you're really looking at is each rotational point has places, a description of places on the mesh. Just a sec. Let's go into object here, mode here. So let's say we take this object here, and I go to weight paint. And what it really means is each particular bone or each rotational point would be able to move the mesh according to its weighting. The weighting would be expressed in color similar to the FLIR imaging. So I had to go along and draw on here, but basically what it means is whenever you have a point, it looks up when you have an object and you have an armature with a set of rotational points, it will try to figure out what point on the object has what claiming it, and then it will figure out by the scale of the colors between the cold and the hot who has the greater say on that dot. Now the reason why, if you don't have an intersection between the two spots, what you'll have is you'll have a complete ripping apart of that object if it isn't at all weighted, or there's no other claim. So it's really when you have two claims to the same area that you have part of it that's being pulled back into the original area and not the movement area. So that makes it sort of like when you bend something, it isn't just ripped off. It stays in the middle because you have an overlapping claim between two areas. So that's really what makes it took me a long time to understand that. That's really what's important, is that you have to have distinct areas that are owned by a rotational center, but then overlapping areas, so that part of it will be left behind. You'll get a smooth gradation when these objects move. Apparently there's something else called shape keys, and I don't at this time understand how those shape keys work. They look like they have a range of movement, and for this particular application, I didn't look into that. Also, what happens is whenever we have these areas here, they're not completely, because I painted this myself, it's very hard to get these perfectly smooth gradations. And what happens is in your final model, you'll have sort of like elderly skin appearance with this. So what I did is I put a post modifier on the the object that would smooth the mesh, so that when it's done, you wind up with something that doesn't have this sort of problem. Right here, you used to have that kind of problem, but that doesn't exist anymore. The way I did this and the way that it's really done is you start with that basic shape, and then other things here. These are done by mask extracts, and building on top of an object. So here we have really two objects: the original object, another object which is a clothing object similar to real life object. And what you really want to do is you want to transfer the weights using the weight paint. Where is it? You have to select the other one. You select both of them at the same time in the order you want to transfer. But use this transfer weights, and what happens is the vertexes the geometry isn't exactly precise, but the neighbored geometry will transfer the weighting from one object to another with a slightly different geometry. So then you wind up with the same weighting for both objects, so that when they deform, you don't get things going inside of each other, these two objects going inside of each other. So you always want to, in some manner, transfer the weights before the transformation occurs. I think you can do that using modifier, and you have to apply it. You can also flip the object. What else is you can make a copy of the weighted object, flip it, rename it as the other side, and then transfer using data transfer, and then you can transfer the mesh information, the weighting information, to the other side without actually painting it. That's something else I learned you could do. So here's like the two modes here of this scene, and I'm gonna try and make a transition by basically doing the same thing twice, and then just making a fade from one to the other. And that's the night view, and this is like the day view.